It is the unforgivable sin. Watch Percy Jackson. Just like that's it. No context needed. The cameras can just turn off and we're done for the day.
Percy Jackson, unforgivable.
So actually, now that I'm thinking about it, since we did Nephilim so thoroughly, yeah, Gilgamesh was one.
Mm-hmm.
Just putting that out there for you. So
giant.
I actually found it really interesting. If you've ever been to Answers in Genesis, the Ark Encounter, they've got a plaque up that very firmly says that Nephilim are just the are a result of the sons of Cain marrying the daughters of Seth or something like that, the Sethite view. But then if you go online to their website, they're like, we don't know, and we think we lean towards the angelic view. And it's like, how did this ever happen? Who in the department either wrote the article that disagrees with the plaque or that wrote the plaque that disagrees with the article? So funny.
Well, and I think why I just don't see the evidence for
No.
I mean, Seth was considered honorable.
Yeah.
Not directly quoted.
But I don't think he's God.
Well, yeah, I don't think like the sons of God and daughters of men. That just doesn't seem like, why wouldn't you just say the sons of Seth and the daughters of Cain?
Well, and it's a unique Hebrew phrase. So most of the time when people are like, actually in the Hebrew it says, you're about to hear the biggest heresy of the day. But the great thing is that this isn't like a new idea. This is literally what the Jewish people of Jesus' day believed. You know, the ones who stoned him and crucified him and are super reliable. But also the early church fathers believed, and apparently a few writers of the New Testament seem to believe, based on their explanations, like Jude and Peter. And so I tend to trust the actual writers of the New Testament and their proteges, like the last guy we mentioned. It was like, not Agamemnon, but I definitely thought of him. Who was he? Let me find out. Went too far. This guy, early church father, he was the super long one. Athenagoras. Athenagoras. There we go, Athenagoras. I definitely read the entire book he wrote, as you can tell by the fact I can't pronounce his name. But his quote is excellent.
Well, and specifically Genesis doesn't have any problem mentioning, definitely don't marry these people.
Yeah.
Like the amount of times, what is it? Abraham and Isaac both say, do not marry from the daughters of Canaan. They do not do it. It's like, okay, well then, since when are we referring to them in one passage as daughters of men? That's just, it doesn't make sense. Throughout the entire rest of Genesis, it's explicitly Canaan. I mean, different people, but still name dropping them is important. And so I definitely hold the angelic view, because, you know, as we already covered, the sons of God portion is very clearly angels. Very clearly angels.
The verbiage is, the early church recognized it as that, although the early church fathers aren't infallible, but when they tend to all have a consensus on something, I tend to, particularly if they had relation to the actual writers of the Bible, and they all agree, I generally at least weight their agreement and put it into consideration. And so they did agree on that. The actual writers of the New Testament, Peter and Jude at least, seem to agree with that. And is the clear reading of the text. And so when I look at Scripture alone, I look at the writers of the New Testament, and then I look at their proteges in the early church, and they all seem to say the same thing. I tend to think, maybe I should agree with them. I think it's particularly telling how, you know, Phineas is praised for literally just taking his spear as people are deliberating and spearing the Israelite who's having sex with the Canaanite, and how Balaam, when he couldn't prophesy successfully against the sons of Israel, says, you know, the one thing that'll work, if you get your Canaanites to have sex with the Israelites, then God will turn against them. And so Phineas, you know, puts an end to that violently, suddenly, with his spear. And God praises him for it. And so I assume Balaam was onto something when he's like, if I can't curse them and we can't fight them, here's what to do. Get them to marry your women. You would think that would not be a very sound military strategy, but it was. And I think it's because it's more than just, we've got a few dudes who are related to Seth still around.
Well, and on the note of military strategy, one of the questions I have is, if the sons of God going into the daughters of men, spawning the Nephilim,
Mhm.
if that every single time resulted pretty much in God immediately wiping out an entire group of people,
Mhm.
my thought is, why wouldn't he keep doing that?
Yes.
Because it seems effective, like
Yes.
super effective.
Well, and I'd argue America's generally worse than Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mhm.
At least. I mean, Moloch blood sacrificed children. We already dance to the Asherah poles and worship Baal through the sexual revolution and just having sex whenever. And the pagan cultures, you know, the Canaanites that God does kill, they're doing that. And after they start worshiping these gods of fertility, which were female deities generally, by the way, then they introduce the male deity of Moloch. And they're like, well, what do we do with these kids that we now have? We're going to sacrifice them. What does America do? We let in those old gods, at least the same old evil. We have unlimited sex with the sexual revolution, unbounded. And then we're like, what do we do with our children? And we're like, Moloch, here we come, buddy.
Moloch sitting there in a white coat with a little, like a heartbeat. I don't know what you call that. He's just sitting there with his clipboard with a mask on, like, nobody's gonna recognize me. You come for an abortion? Cool, come here.
Yeah, there's a reason they don't have to be incredibly creative.
Yeah.
Because we literally just keep doing the exact same stuff. There's nothing new under the sun.
Well, yeah, and our culture is, like, went super science-y, materialistic, and now I feel like turning a corner, as I'm sure you see it more often, we're turning a corner to more spirituality again.
Yeah.
And it's almost going in the direction of the Native Americans with
Yes.
like the ancestors, the foreign spirits coming into play, and I can have relation with these spirits and call on them when I need them, and they can benefit me with magic. Divination.
Yep.
Right? Big one. Fortune telling, which was
Tarot
seen
cards.
as which was seen as, you know, a circus trick, is now, you know, oh, what's your your zodiac, your horoscope, and then here's tarot, like you said, tarot cards, and let me tell
Scribe
you exactly
portals,
what's going
all
on with
this
your
stuff.
life. Yeah, scribe portals.
Well, and I think it's particularly interesting because it's not a let's turn back to God, but now that we've decided we are gods, we're now realizing that is meaningless if there is nothing beyond us. If we are gods and everything's material, then so what? The only way it can mean anything is if you can rule a nation. But if you can tap into the divine, you don't have to rule a nation to have power. You can become God and get power yourself just in your living room. I have this lovely book. I actually don't have it up here. It's the Guide to Witchcraft, in case you're wondering. And it has one casually does. And it's got beautiful, actually I say that sarcastically, horrible diagrams about how to set up your own altar in a place like this, just in your living room, in the corner of your room. And it's very clearly satanic, and so people turn to that in a pursuit for power and godhood, and they link it up with this whole environmentalism of being like one with nature. Sure, we're literally spilling our own blood to get power, but rather what we like to call it is we're giving some of our life force back to Mother Nature, to commune in oneness with her, and so it's giving back. It's being a good steward of our natural resources. And so they're hijacking this biblical language of dominion, but saying, let's not do dominion, let's not conquer nature and rightfully rule over it, caring for it as we do so. Rather, let's just bypass the whole dominion part and let's just care for it and worship Mother Nature instead. And so we've got, Earth Day and all that stuff, and we're like, I can't believe we're using fossil fuels and blah, blah, blah. And like, let's give all the power to the government, who also happens to be a god figure too, because all laws define our statements on morality. So whoever is making statements on morality, if there's no one greater, then obviously they become your god figure. And so if you want to become God and you're competing with the government who's literally legislating morality, then you have to tap into the divine. Which isn't to say I don't think the government isn't doing the same thing, but it is to say that individual people, I think it's just the logical way to go. And it's weird because since I moved here to the Seattle-ish area, I keep running into that. And so, like weird witch battles. And I'm not Pentecostal, by the way. But weird witch battles that I never had beforehand. And so it's weird. Hence the book on Wicca. I need to know about this.
And the weird view on, like, we are gods ourselves. And the whole mindset is, I am exactly who I can do whatever I want with myself.
Yes.
And I am perfect the way that I already am.
Yeah.
Yet, in that culture, there is a mindset of I'm born in the wrong body, I'm not who I'm supposed to be, and it's not a biological problem, though that's the phrasing they use. I was born in the wrong body, I was this, I was that. They tap into a more spiritual, who I am is not my flesh. My flesh is wrong.
Yep.
It's what
it requires a spirit.
Yes, my spirit is in the wrong place. And so then
two spirits are an actual term that they use now.
Yes, two spirit. And with our culture being so geared towards your ultimate self-worth and meaning is defined by your sexuality, there is a sexuality that revolves around ghosts.
Yes.
And spirits.
Yeah,
and
alien encounters are always pretty much men, and it's always sexual experimentation again.
Yeah, and so with that being the way our culture is going, if that is your ultimate you, that directly relates to the sexual perversion of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yep.
And the time in Genesis, or that's in Genesis, but the time of Noah, when the daughters of men would go with the sons of God and create these abominations known as the Nephilim, who were kind of like Gilgamesh is saying, I don't know how accurate Gilgamesh is with it, but a third man and 2/3 God. Not God himself, but God as an angelic being.
Yeah. Yeah, because the word that we often have for God in the Hebrew scriptures is just Elohim, which we generally know as referring to the actual God, because he's, like Psalm 82, he's the Elohim who's enthroned among Elohim, but it's not that we believe in multiple gods like Mormons will try to push on you. In fact, the Elohim, or, actual Yahweh God, ends up judging them, and he's like, you guys are awful dudes. You have sinned, you're gonna die the same, your fate will be like men, is what it concludes with. So these aren't like multiple actual gods, but rather it's just the term that often gets translated to God that is referring to spiritual beings like angels. Whereas we naturally have bodies, Elohim do not naturally have bodies, right? God took on flesh, but it's not that the incarnation is anything less than a miracle. It is fully a miracle. God is spirit, who is none can see God, right? It says, and none have seen God the Father. Christ had to take on flesh, incarnation, to dwell among us. And people were even scared when he had his glorified body. But God can do that. He can do that. But it is wrong for those he has commanded not to attempt it on their own. And therefore it's this inverted incarnation. And kind of similar to how like the Muslims understand the incarnation. They're like, oh, you think that Jesus is basically a demigod. And sometimes they'll use the example of, Zeus impregnating a woman and making a son. They'll be like, yeah, God the Father, impregnating a woman and having a son. No, that's the perversion. That's exactly what we're talking about now. That's not what God did. The incarnation is not God going into a woman and making a child. It's a supernatural indwelling of Mary's womb. The Catholics, call her the Theotokos, which I'm not actually against. She is the mother of God, but not in this weird sexual way, like the fallen angels had to do in order to get this product, which is by nature inferior, which is interesting.
Well, and it's interesting the way that, the Nephilim were known as men of renown, so they gained a lot of popularity, and I think of the inspiration for a lot of Greek myths, right? There's some linkage between Nimrod and people like Thor and Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And I think of the way that Greek mythology, and I guess Roman mythology, but I'm more familiar with the Greek side of it.
Absolutely. Well, and Romans are just everything Greek, but we'll change the names because we like our stuff more.
Yeah, and the names are not nice. I don't like the planetary names. But
like, do you know a Christian discovered the annoying planet? It was either Neptune or Uranus.
Pluto.
And he thought about naming it after like something in the Bible, but then he's like, nah, I'll follow tradition and name it after a Greek pagan demon, which I think was such a missed opportunity.
And the weird thing with demigods in those mythologies is I would flip the order of the way Gilgamesh puts it, where I'd say they're more 2/3 man, 1/3 God.
Yeah.
Given that they're typically depicted as being completely normal people. You wouldn't, kind of like the description of Jesus, nothing about him would make you turn your head and acknowledge him. But yet they had these amazing abilities like Hercules and his strength.
Yeah.
I don't know what was special about Perseus. I'm blanking on it, but he was able to accomplish great things.
Something.
Maybe his battle tactic or intellect helped him take care of Medusa.
Yeah.
But these people, these are actual sexual perversions, right? Zeus was very sexually active with mortals.
Yes.
Wonder where they got that idea from.
I have no idea.
The angels and the daughters of men creating Nephilim. But the thing with Nephilim is Nephilim are more so on the side of, what's that creature's name from the Epic of Gilgamesh?
Enkidu.
There's I would put them more similar to Enkidu, as in they seem interesting but nasty.
Yes.
Right, the 6 fingers, 6 toes are huge. There's really no other description given to them.
Yeah, like they can't get the formula down quite.
Yeah.
They're close, but they don't have it quite there. They come out like with more digits than they're supposed to. You get these abnormalities that are it's close but not there. Like if you've ever been driving late at night and you pass something and you're like, and it catches your eye, but you're still going, so you never get a good look at it, but it's like something was off. And most of the time, probably nothing was off, but it's like that sort of fleeting feeling with Nephilim, where it's like almost man, but something's obviously off here.
I almost feel like you'd have a reaction of, kind of going back to what I said earlier, but in a more serious context, if you saw somebody like the Hulk, or more like the very first X-Men film, seeing Sabretooth.
Yep.
Where you look and you're almost impressed, but also you're weirded out.
Yep.
Like, wow, that's a really big, strong-looking dude, but I don't want to be next to you. Because you are terrifying.
Yep.
And if you see somebody with hundreds of pounds of armor on, bronze, and carrying a giant spear the size of a...
Weaver's beam?
Yeah, Weaver's beam.
I don't know what a Weaver's beam is, but that...
I looked it up, and they're huge.
Oh, okay.
They're massive. And seeing that, you'd be impressed, but not want to get near it. It's like being in the presence of a bull.
Yeah.
Right? You see a bull, you're like, wow, that is a very powerful animal. Keep the fence between us, please.
Yes. Yep.
Or unless you want to take a more the movie. I think the movie's called Noah. Where
Hey, great visuals, if I remember correctly.
Where they're depicted as rock creatures for some reason. I was gonna look into why that was, but I didn't have time, and I don't know what about the description of Nephilim and Goliath gives you the impression they're rocks.
Yeah. Okay, so the only way I can think to get there is trolls, and trolls are of the fairy family according to medieval categorization of fairies, and they would dwell underground where evil lives and have like cities, and that's why they're like, they turn to stone in the light because light is understood to be from God and that sort of stuff. And so they were like demons that had some actual form to them, but didn't dwell with humanity. And with sometimes the only times they come up to the earth is to kidnap children, and presumably, like Nimrod, it seems, they'd hunt other humans, but they took particular delight in children, and taking children, dragging them down to their underground burrows, and I assume eating them, drinking their blood, all of that, the exact stuff that Acts at the Jerusalem Council, I want to say Acts 15, actually commands even Gentiles don't do this. They would do. And so maybe I could see that as a connection, but it's extremely strenuous because there's nothing, I don't think the medieval world would even categorize these as Nephilim. And I personally don't credit the movie director to know all that lore, considering how badly he just portrayed the account in general. But, if he knew enough to make that mistake, that's the only way I could justify making that mistake.
Well, and really, regardless of how you take it, what we do know is that they're horrible people, right? They're evil. Like, what is it? Maybe it's Samuel? I don't know. Whatever account we read talked about that they were would devour men.
Yes.
And so they were clearly they're bad enough for God to wipe them out.
Yep.
The question is, was the flood worth it if they came back?
Ooh. So, I've heard a good reason why this isn't the case, but I forgot what the good reason is, so I'll say it again.
Nice.
I've always assumed that this flood was successful in wiping them all out, and Satan just was like, let me try 2.0, when the promise was narrowed down to Abraham. And he got more specific, and he's like, I'll have some of my minions basically do it again, and maybe we can be successful this time. I've once heard a fairly convincing reason why that might not be the case. I'm conveniently forgetting it right now, but that has generally been my assumption, because it kind of bypasses this whole problem of them surviving the flood and the flood not being sufficient, and it allows you to assume that the flood is actually a fully sufficient judgment, and is Satan and his free will deciding to just do it again, which is
once he knows the particular area to focus on.
Yes, because then you don't have to try the whole world, and right, God only brought the flood once the whole world is corrupted with this, and so if I would assume the logic would go, therefore, if God didn't send the flood when he had only corrupted part of the world last time, then he could probably get away with corrupting part of it again. And no flood that time, but still wiped out completely.
Which line did Satan pollute under Abraham? Because once it was narrowed down, he knew his focus point.
Oh, so yeah, I don't remember him successfully getting one of the tribes of Israel, but I mean, after David, once the Davidic covenant, you definitely see like the passage we read where David and his men have to go battle the giants of Philistia.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we know they come back.
Yeah.
That's what's important, is we know they come back. We don't know Satan in his mind, really.
No.
But we do know that they come back, and then supposedly either were wiped out or not wiped out.
Well, so the Philistines, God has through the words of a prophet prophesies their complete eradication eventually, and then it is recorded that it's either Babylon or Assyria, but I want to say Babylon completely exterminates the Philistines after they take Jerusalem. And so there are no more. Like the Muslims and Hamas that are like, we're the Philistines. I love that they will take that title because it's like immediate reason to wipe them out. But they're not actually. They what they mean by that is, some of them that I've met in America are like, we're literally descended from them, and I'm thinking you really don't want to go there. But what the educated ones mean by that is we have the spirit of that. We have the same goals that the Philistines did. We want to be a thorn in the side to Israel and wipe them out eventually.
And the Philistines were wiped out after the Rephaim, right?
Yeah.
So it went Nephilim,
sons of
Anak, Rephaim, Philistines, kind of.
Yeah.
And then, so they were all wiped out. And so it would stand to reason that from the point of the Philistines being wiped out until X date, there were no Nephilim.
I think so, because I don't see a distinct purpose for it after Christ's conquering on the cross, because at that point the seed has come.
But we still have the seed of the serpent.
Yes, well, and that's interesting, because people often think that that Satan's head was crushed on the cross, but Paul specifically, I believe that the doom of Satan was sealed on the cross. But in Romans 16, I'll bring up the exact verse. Paul actually mentions that entire prophecy as still being in the future, which is interesting.
Romans 16:20.
Oh, that sounds right. Yes, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. As using some very similar language. In fact, if you compare it to the Septuagint, very, very similar. And then again, will soon crush Satan under your feet. Not that Satan has already been crushed, but that he will soon be crushed. And so I believe that the cross sealed Satan's victory. It declared victory over death, sin, and the devil. However, when Jesus will return to actually throw Satan in the lake of fire, and that it will be that full pounding into dirt, crushing. That's when the judgment will be actualized, because Satan still, prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But he's always been limited and can only do what God allows him, as Job shows us. And so I believe that's still in the future, placing back in Genesis where it talks about that crushing. It says that a seed of the woman will crush Satan's head, and then it says that I want to quote it directly. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, you shall bruise him on the heel. Both seeds in there are singular, and Paul makes a big point, I want to say in the book of Galatians, that because the seed is singular here, it is proof that the Messiah must be singular, that you don't have lots of Jesuses, or that Jesus or lots or anything like that, but rather that you have the necessity of a single actual incarnation of God-man, an actual one culmination of the woman's seed. So if that's the argument, it would stand to reason that same with Satan. And so there's lots of weird theories. Doctrine of the serpent seed is what it's called. Super bad weird theories about that. I would argue that it's just going to be the Antichrist, Satan's attempted mirroring of what Jesus did with the incarnation, and that being a reason why it seems as if the spirits who are disobedient in Noah's day will be released from the abyss, near the onset of the tribulation and all of that, and that we'll see that really rise again. I'm not sure if they're right, if the history of here be giants put on maps and actual reports, somewhat credible, of giants in pagan cultures, but then they just go away or something. I assume there might have been some random ones here and there, but I don't think there's any concerted effort by Satan at this time to do that. Instead, I think rather there is research being conducted to determine how can we erase these weird abnormalities and perfect this Nephilim result. And that would eventually, of course, be the Antichrist, and a more trying to recreate the incarnation more fully. Because now that Satan's seen the incarnation, he's like, that's how it's supposed to be done, and seeing if he can get that and imitate that more closely. Because all the world will marvel at the beast, and it'll appear as if he's dead and comes back. So imitating the resurrection, imitating everything Christ did, trying to put him up as a Messiah figure. It would only make sense that he'd want to mirror Jesus as much as possible. And so, you kind of need to eliminate the whole 6 toes, 6 fingers sort of problem. Maybe get rid of some of the giant aspect too. I don't know. You might want to clamp down a little bit on some of these abnormalities that just make it appear that you're not actually a person.
Well, I don't know.
Or a human being.
Given the way that our culture is headed, it's okay to be an animal, it's okay to be a different sex. True. We could reach a point.
Let's all worship the pretty pony.
Not to the extreme that
the demonically speaking pretty pony.
Not in the direction that the cyberpunk universe takes it, but to the point where personal attachments and abnormalities like that become more popularized.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
We see in Job there is a distinction between the sons of God and Satan. Satan is separated.
Yes.
In almost all cases because he is distinct.
Yeah.
And so the serpent's seed, right? We see the sons of God laying with the daughters of men, creating the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they are capable of. And like you were just talking about, Satan having his go ahead at it when it's his time.
Yep.
Could be the same. And it could be just another Nephilim who is great, but he is mentored and guided by his father Satan. Or kind of what you're saying, where Satan, being the chief deceiver, can guide it how he wants it to the point where that's more human-like than giant-like.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I could see him keeping the giant thing. At the end of the day, it's just speculation, but the alien encounters, man. What do you do about those? Obviously experimenting sexually on pagans, that just goes without saying. Basically, I'm sure we're all familiar with that.
Well, it's so backwards how, if the whole thing is Satan wants to create a bunch of demon spawns, and yet Satan's also super pro-abortion.
That is super funny, actually. Although, the question then comes, can Nephilim procreate? I would argue the Nephilim can't. Kind of like if you take
I was going to say that I think they can, because doesn't it say that in one of the passages that Goliath's brothers were descendants of the Rephaim?
I think that's true. Ooh.
We can pull it up. Hold on. Ooh. I have it here in just a second.
That might be true.
Oh, I locked it.
I think that is true. I don't know what to do about that, actually. So Those poor children.
Cush, let's see.
Nope, you're not going to heaven.
Okay.
Actually, look it up yourself.
Who was among the descendants of the giant?
Well, that's awful. Okay.
But what that would go to show is my assumption.
The giant
That is exclusively that would be an exclusive. What do you call it? Lineage, where if a Nephilim, being angel human, being such a unique breed, when a Nephilim breeds, either they would just breed with each other and create more Nephilim. We don't have any reason to believe Nephilim breed with humans.
No. Well, and then the other thing would be, was that giant one of the demons taking on human form, or was it? I think the giant is it mentioned that this giant that they're descended from is a Nephilim himself. I would assume so, because that's what the giants generally were and understood by. That's how the ancient church understood giants. So I'm assuming you're right, but I don't know if Scripture actually says.
Yes, this is 2 Samuel 21:15-22.
Okay.
Now it came about after this that there was war again with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Saph, who was among the descendants of the giant. So the giant, I don't know if is stated.
There's no reason to assume this isn't a Nephilim, though, so it probably is, because in every other case where we do know, the giant is a Nephilim, so, yeah.
And so they can procreate, assuming that that's what this is talking about, but we have no indication that the descendants changed in any way. What we do know from this passage is they were still huge, Weaver's beam and all that.
So it doesn't seem watered down over
6 fingers,
time.
6 toes. Yeah, so it seems to be fairly consistent with it's just giant after giant after giant. So my assumption would be that they would just procreate with each other. I think they were very racist or speciesist. I agree. Because I have to assume that if angel and man come together and they create this vastly different creature, then if that vastly different creature and humans came together, it would be vastly different. But considering it seems consistent, I have to assume that once angels did their thing, or I guess demons or whatever you want to call them did their thing, those beings just stayed very tribal.
Yeah.
Of this is who we are purely evil, we'll stick with it.
Well, and in like kind, that just makes sense.
Yeah. That would be my assumption.
Yeah.
Because I think the more diluted the gene would get, the more questionable the state of their being would be as far as where they stand with God.
Well, and at some point, I would argue if you have any demonic blood, you're just not going to heaven. And the question shouldn't be why do people go to hell, because we all deserve it. The question is, how can anyone get to heaven? And that's the cross. And so whom did Jesus die for? I'm hesitant to say Jesus didn't have to die, because that would insinuate that his character would be unchanged, that his mercy would still be there. But I think God could maintain his integrity regardless of what he chose to do. And so I might be willing to say that to an extent, that if God had not sent Christ, that he would still maintain his righteousness, justice obviously by sending all of humanity to hell, but to an extent even his mercy, because he would be allowing us to live our lives on earth, and that would be a period of grace. And so thank the Lord for the cross. In his divine love, mercy, and grace, he chose to die for us. But even Jesus was like, if there's any other way, please take this cup from me. And so I have to assume that it's not unjust for God to have chosen to not die for Nephilim and their products. He didn't die for Satan or his angels. Like, they're fallen, they're just express tickets basically to hell. They don't get a second chance. They're not going to be redeemed. And so I assume likewise, if it's not unjust for God to have not died for angels, it's not unjust for him to have not died for Nephilim, but he chose to die specifically for humanity.
Well, and you could also argue that, given however Nephilim worked other than just procreation, you could stand to argue that what the fallen angels did was put a piece of themselves in a flesh bag.
Yes.
And so these creatures would need no redemption because they are just an extension of the fallen angel.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so it's not really a child-parent relationship, as some of the quotes we read kind of put it. More of a, like, this is like my puppet.
Yeah.
This is a method in which I am working through this person. Almost not possession, but I'm sure there's another word you could use.
It's like another level up from possession.
Yeah.
Because it's not like it's not like the demon is taking is going into an actual human being, but rather the demon fashions a body of flesh for himself.
Ooh.
And then, yeah.
Here is a great example. Going back to Harry Potter.
Okay. The best, cleanest book series ever. No controversy.
Voldemort had what's called, I think, Horcruxes.
Yes.
Which are literal extensions of himself.
Yep.
The most popular being his pet snake, which is him, and it's part of him. So the only way you could kill Voldemort was by killing all the Horcruxes.
So that snake had better have a long life expectancy.
I think it was immortal.
Ah, that is why. That makes so much more sense now. Because I'm thinking, snakes only live X number of years. Like, some of them long, but if I remember correctly, Voldemort, has a very, very long history, right?
Yes.
More than 70 years. So I'm thinking, oh no, that poor snake had better be hanging on. But if it does immortal to begin with, then it works.
But, like we said, nothing's new under the sun. So it could be a method such as that, where it's this fallen angel imparts part of themselves into this bag of human flesh that's deformed. That
makes sense. Yeah, well, I think we see instances of them doing that sort of thing today, depending on what one thinks about, injured Cole. What's that from? It's not Skinwalker Ranch, it's the other one. It's from Haunted Cosmos. It's the episode series right before that, before Skinwalker Ranch. The one, that little town, he is this bird flying thingy.
Mothman?
Yeah, Mothman. And after Mothman, you have injured Cole show up, and he's obviously a demon just puppeting a human and trying to act like it, which is interesting because I didn't realize until only recently that the name is literally In Dread of Cole. Right on. You know what you're scared of. I appreciate that, at least.
Nice.
But but depending what you think of those eyewitness encounters, and I think there's lots of fake ones out there, but generally my standard for evidence, I try to keep the same as the resurrection, right? If it's I can eliminate all other reasons for, all reasons to fabricate an account, then I might believe it. So for instance, did you get anything from it? Did you get wealth, power, fame, good fame, not you were drugged through the news fame, but good fame. People liked you, popularity sort of contest. You got, you got unlimited sex like Muhammad. If you got any of those things, then I'm much less likely to believe the source. But if you were scorned by society and persecuted for it, I'm suddenly more likely to believe it, particularly if you weren't earlier. If you were in good standing of society, you came forward and you said, and you gave your story, your account, and then you suffered for it. And then the key is, did you go back on it? Did you recant, right? And so the apostles, I believe, are reliable eyewitness testimonies because they suffered for it. They didn't, gain popularity contest from it. They didn't gain immense wealth from it. In fact, when they were persecuted, and very much so, eventually it led to most of their deaths, and they still didn't recant. So they at least were sincere about what they believed they saw. The question is, did they see correctly? And so then you can go back and forth on that. But at the very least, I think a person who is being objective has to conclude that many of these accounts, if the person gained nothing from it, and in fact their quality of life went down, they lost their job, they were ridiculed for it, all these things, and they had a respectable profession or place in their town earlier, and they wouldn't recant even when asked to, that they at least are sincere about what they're reporting on. They could be incorrect, they could be misremembering something, they could be, there's lots of times where you think you see something out of the corner of your eye and you didn't, could be, but generally the encounters of, for instance, injured Cole, it's not a corner of the eye thing, it's he walks up to your door and talks to you for a while. And so this isn't just that sort of thing. And so I very much do believe that those ought to be trusted. Maybe they're incorrect about what happened, but they're sincere at least. And so when you get enough of those that have a particular pattern of sincere people who are isolated, or at least came from different backgrounds with that, then I'm going to generally put weight into at least what they believe they saw. Similar as I would for the resurrection. And I think really anyone has to do that to some degree, because we all trust certain historical records. I've yet to meet someone who genuinely thinks that the world could have begun 2 seconds ago, and that all of history is fabricated. You end up trusting something. You trust your personal experience, which is still faulty, but some level of trust. And then you have to trust other people's personal experience to some degree of at least they might be sincere about what they think happens. Now, are they correct in their personal experience? That's an entirely different thing, and many people aren't. But history is just that, a recording of people's and nations and empires and communities, and saying this is what happened. And so you have to believe that Rome existed, that Columbus did sail the ocean blue in 1492, because these are all historical records passed down in written form from someone's testimony of something.
Well, and you don't ever meet somebody. I mean, even if our standard is X thing,
Yeah.
people live as if it's a lot lower than
Yes.
that. You don't meet people walking around. You walk up to them, hey, did Caesar exist? And they go, no. That just doesn't happen.
No.
That's not even a question. They're like, of course Caesar existed. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me walk through the biblical evidence of Christ.
Yeah.
No way. Okay, come on, man.
Exactly.
let's be consistent
Yes.
here.
And so let's look at more recent history, apply the same metric we would to ancient history, and see, okay, what do we do with these accounts? And so some of them I think are believable. And so all that to say that I think that sort of thing can shed further light on what we're talking about.
Yeah, and with the Nephilim, or the sons of Anak, or the Rephaim, the Philistines, whatever you want to say, there are supposedly eyewitness testimony of people seeing them in recent years.
Yes.
Whether or not they're reliable, the stories that I've heard seem reliable.
Some do, yeah.
And they typically originate, there's a very popular one, I'm forgetting what it is.
It's in the Middle East.
Yes.
Islam, cough, cough.
Yes, they're in the Middle East with the people who claim to be the new Philistines.
Oh, Muhammad, you poor person. What did you get yourself into?
And
actually, poor Aisha.
If the verse about the days of Noah is to be taken in that particular way, of this particular sin is going to have its rise again, have you seen the charts where it's like the most famous artists throughout the years, and it's like these bars increasing and sort of like passing each other? Yeah. I think when it comes to our country and the perversion of sexuality, I'd keep a very close eye on the two-spirit / ghost sex mate, as it, in Wicca particularly, as it probably will increase.
Absolutely, I think so.
If that's going to become, if the sin of Noah's time is going to return.
Yeah.
And Scripture gives us an indication of what these people look like to an extent. I think it's vague on purpose, because I assume you'll know.
Yeah.
That the great descriptions I needed, you'll look and say that's humanish.
Yeah, humanoid.
And
so what will people then conclude? Aliens is probably what they'll do,
that's
in the West.
That's the big thing. You read Revelation, you look at, the return of Christ, whether, different Christians have different views of the rapture, alien abduction, all those things. I think Satan's going to jump on that.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's interesting to me, it's remarkable. I say more than a coincidence that I was mentioning kind of how the same strategy that God used, the same strategy that Satan used against the Canaanites, right? He first starts with their sexuality, and then child sacrifice, because what do you do with all the children you had when you're dancing at the Asherah poles and worshiping Baal? What do you do with that? Sacrifice your children, right? And then it keeps going. We're along that same trajectory, and like the Canaanites, around the time of the sexual revolution, you began getting an uptick in aliens. And it's interesting because those encounters are only in the West. You don't get those really in Africa or South America much even. It's the West, the place where we have had a successful sexual revolution by and large. And immediately with that, you see Hollywood then jumping on that. You see films like E.T. coming out. Interstellar, I think, does a little bit with that, but not too much. Arrival has aliens that are actually, like, literally, if you're familiar with the alien, eyewitness testimonies from pagans, they talk about missing time. Arrival a sci-fi show that came out in just the last like 15 years literally has missing time. The aliens don't require time to function, and so when you begin to communicate with them, you get disoriented and out of time, and like you start to mesh the future with the current and the past, and it's like you're not sure the time stream, and it's very eerily similar to the whole missing time that people report, if you're to believe the eyewitness testimony, which I think there are some that are to be believed. And so it's like this, like Satan is setting up the culture preemptively to then accept it. And the military seems to take it seriously. You know, in the 90s, you had the I think it was the CIA literally working with psychics, they believe, the CIA believed that a person really could. What's that whole out of body thing? Astral projection. Yes, they believe that astral projection was possible, and they actually studied those who said they could do it scientifically. It was found that there were times, particularly when the facility was super secret, that it couldn't be done, which is interesting. It's almost like demons don't know everything, and they couldn't find the person, which is super interesting. And actually, I think it's really telling that when there was a Christian there was the chance of a successful astral projection was like basically zero, as far as I remember. Which it's like, well, God said no.
God said no. Well, and like demons working with people and demon spawns is not a new thing. In pop culture, it's very common. We have very popular Marvel characters like Wanda, who uses evil magic. You have Ghost Rider, who is a demon or a demon spirit indwelling a man, creating a new hybrid of like superhero named Ghost Rider.
Definitely someone to look up to.
Yep. You have the son of Mephisto, I think.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Mephisto is a demon, and then you have his son, who is Nightcrawler, I believe, who is
apt.
I think a human Mephisto spawn. So a Nephilim.
Oh, wonderful.
I could be wrong.
Like Percy Jackson.
Yes, that's it is exactly like Percy Jackson.
So I'd like to conclude that it is the unforgivable sin to watch Percy Jackson. Just like that's it. No context needed. The cameras can just turn off and we're done for the day.
Percy Jackson, unforgivable.
Yeah.
Can't watch Percy Jackson.
You don't need to. You can do anything, right? You can get an abortion. You can like do the whole LGBTQ thing. You can even just choose to put Christ on like a Disney Plus subscription. But if you like Percy Jackson, that's it for you.
Yep.
That's it. That's the real bad one.
You can watch Death Note and be all for the demon doing the things. You can be a super supporter of that. But if you watch Percy Jackson and so much enjoy the action,
that's it.
Too bad. Straight to hell.
Or even just read it.
Just read it. Yeah, there will be a special ticket to hell just for you. You'll go before the prophet. You'll go before the beast.
In fact, it's at the end of the book. Like literally, it just has the ticket back there. You know.
Yep, it says sign here.
In blood.
it's like the end of like the Gideon Bibles where it's like put the date you were saved.
Oh yeah.
After saying this prayer, it's like put the date you watched Percy Jackson. The day you were doomed. Oh man, that would be so bad.
Yeah, to like it's that sometimes like CVS is known for the super long receipts, or like sometimes you have to sign receipts when you eat out.
Yes.
You get a super long receipt when you purchase the book, and it's like sign at the bottom, and no one reads it because it's terms and conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's your terms and conditions. It's like as soon as you press play on Percy Jackson, it's like warning, we'll send you straight to hell. Do you agree to continue? It's like the Netflix. Are you still watching?
Oh yeah. Which is why I don't think the Mark of the Beast is just like something you could click yes to or anything like that. I don't know what it is then, because that eliminates a whole lot of things. But I assume it's not something that some poor Christian could be like,
accidentally go into.
Whoopsies.
Yeah.
Didn't read the full terms and conditions. They just pressed yes.
Well, because I don't think the Mark of the Beast, like with the Nephilim, one of the reasons I don't think Nephilim can be saved is because they're just demon. Like, yeah. It's not like a human who happens to have this faulty demon condition. I believe they are demon in human, like in a like I said, a skin bag.
Yeah.
Skinwalkers, if you will. Not the same thing, but I will describe them that way.
Yeah. You commit the etymological fallacy in a constructive way.
Well, it's like some people believe like the vaccine was the Mark of the Beast, which I don't believe.
Not pro-vaccine. I didn't get it, by the way. But still,
yeah, it's
not
like
the mark of the beast.
To jump and say it's the mark of the beast because it like changes. It's like all vaccines change you in some way.
Yeah.
They give you whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm not vaccinated either,
No.
but
That's why we're alive.
I think some I think some Christians jumping to that conclusion so quickly is very dangerous.
Yeah. I think Doug Wilson, on one of his blogs he wrote, probably Blog and They Blog, he was like, he wrote an article about how it's not the mark of the beast, but he begins in the opener, or either opener or end, it wasn't in the middle, where he's actually making the argument. Somewhere in the article, he says something to the effect of, it may not be the mark of the beast, but if you want to stop convincing people that it is, then you should stop making it look like it might be. It was this whole tongue-in-cheek thing of how the vaccine was absolutely wrong to force on a population. And so if you don't want crazy Pentecostal Christians thinking you're trying, like running around with their head, like hands in the air, screaming, thinking you're trying to inject the mark of the beast in them, then maybe don't act like the description from Revelation with the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
Maybe don't force the vaccine on people, and you wouldn't have people thinking this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like it gets. And there's a whole hand and forehead thing, which doesn't even correlate to the. I mean, they do scan your forehead when you walk into They used to do that where they check your temperature.
Oh yeah. So I lived near Idaho at that time, thankfully, but I almost didn't get to graduate because they had an atheist council of supposed scholars who I'm sure are definitely the people to trust, who got to evaluate people's religious convictions, and so I got mine. Gab.com. Excellent social media platform. That immediately is like going to get me canceled off YouTube. But anyway, excellent social media platform run by a Christian named Andrew Iskar, I think. Andrew Torba. I apologize. Andrew Torba. Great Christian guy. And when that happened, he created because Gab has a blog that often lets like guest pastors write for it and that sort of thing. He wrote up like, here's a template if you're requesting an exemption for schools. Here's a template if you're like a nurse. Here's a template for churches to give their members that says like the church says this, that sort of thing. And so it was super handy. So I just took his template because that's what it was for, filled in the blanks and like polished up a little of the wording to sound like me because I actually think I can write better than the template. And I think it was a little bit more polished, but it got approved. So I'm very thankful. But yeah, shout out to Gab. I think their First Amendment Christian free speech social media company. So obviously, when you stand by the First Amendment and you let people say whatever, so long as it's not illegal, you're going to get people saying crazy things. But I'd rather people be able to say crazy things than have the whole censorship that we see everywhere else.
I just realized completely just trashed on Percy Jackson. They gave no context as to why.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I don't think we need context.
just leave it there. Correct me if
Next
I'm
we'll
wrong.
go to Dora.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So Percy Jackson, depending on the view you take, glorifies and kind of puts you in favor of this individual who is a demigod or the son of a Poseidon and a woman.
Oh, Poseidon. He founded, I'm thinking of it. What's the wall? Atlantis. So it puts it, yeah, anyway. Atlantis, evil city. Total, like, actually, I believe did exist. But literally, it makes you favor the god, like the supposed god who founded the demon city Atlantis, whom God destroyed with the flood. And it's like, yeah, that's the guy we're going to root for again. We're going to root for him and his son.
And I think it depends on. I think this is one of those situations where ignorance can be bliss, because if you know the history of Atlantis, which I do not, it's not an episode I've watched yet.
It's one of their latest. It's excellent. But the cool thing about it is it's not just like hypothetical, like here's some accounts that seem trustworthy from history, although we have that, but the account we have from Plato about it gives exact dimensions, eyewitness reports, all of that, and we actually found it. It's where any watery city would be. Obviously, the Sahara Desert. But right off the coast, because the Sahara Desert expands, to the coast of Africa, and like it's down to the cubits. Even you can see the waterfalls that poured in. You can see even on Google Maps, like aerial view, of the concentric circles of the city, and it matches the dimensions perfectly. Everything around it is perfectly mentioned. Even the type of stone it mentions is nearby that they mined is exactly where they said. The mountain range that is like off to the side is right there still. Like it just is perfect, to the extent that actual atheists now who are in archaeology will acknowledge, yes, Atlantis was real, but all the supernatural elements weren't. And I think that's just picking and choosing. If all the accounts that you're saying are reliable include the supernatural part, then why would you not trust the supernatural part?
Well, and it goes back to, like, if you know all of that and you are super studied on Nephilim, super studied on how culture takes things and tries to put darkness in a positive light, I would warn Christians against watching shows like that.
Yes.
But there are other Christians who say, it's kind of like the Christmas tree. We were talking about this earlier. Yeah. The Christmas tree is something that was taken and turned to be good. Yeah. I hesitate because good and less bad are different.
Yes. Yes. People say sin is missing the mark, and that's mostly true. That's what the Bible says. But it's specifically in context, if you have a bullseye and you miss the bullseye, yes, you've missed the mark, and you've hit something that's wrong. Yeah. It's not just like, oh, you didn't walk as fast as you could have. Like you didn't do things as well as you could have. It's you did something actually wrong. And so there is a difference between like less ideal and actually bad. I think that's something Muslims don't recognize, because they're like, well, Jesus' body had physical needs, and so it wasn't as ideal as the God, as the Godhead, and not being spirit, and therefore the incarnation was sinful. And it's like, no, you're right, it's inconvenient. He had to eat. He could starve, obviously. He was tempted in the wilderness, but that doesn't mean it's inherently sinful. There's a difference between the two. Less than ideal is not inherently evil. And so anyway, all that to say, I agree.
And so it's really a heart posture thing. If you feel convicted about watching Harry Potter, about Percy Jackson, you're watching it anyway. Like Romans 14 is pretty clear you're in sin. Yeah. Going against your personal convictions. Weigh that as you will, pretty much.
Yep. Ignorance is bliss. As Paul said to the Corinthians, he was so happy that they're still drinking the milk of the word and haven't moved on to the meat.
They were so happy. He was so happy.
Yep. We should have a warning before this podcast, like a big flashing hellfire warning, but how you'll never be able to watch Percy Jackson after you see this.
Warning. Content will cause you to question your liking of shows such as Percy Jackson, the Marvel series, Harry Potter, Star Trek.
Oh yeah, I wanted to make a comment a while ago about how I will comedically, not quite seriously, but in part, blame this whole weird, resuscitation of interest in aliens and the supernatural Wicca stuff in Star Trek, because it's literally a story about vegetarian space commies who enact a one-world government, abolish all money on Earth. Like, literally, all of Earth is a moneyless, classless society with no incentive to work, but because people are basically good, which is a huge theme in Star Trek, people are basically good, they'll then just work anyways and join Starfleet, and their whole mission is extremely satanic. It's like, let's go to the stars and be the aliens to other cultures. We will introduce the poor other alien cultures with our divine gnosis that we've discovered, and they'll become like us. So it's basically like Satan appearing to other cultures as super advanced aliens, right? And all of that, only it's in a way that only Star Trek encapsulates that in a way that the average materialist could accept. And granted, I've watched Star Trek. I think it's super entertaining. Actually, very entertaining. But I will fully acknowledge how the system of Star Trek is evil. I can't wait for someone to finally defeat the Federation. Just like crush the Federation into dust, please. Not the Borg, because the Borg are also bad, but like, I don't know. Someone could do it. They make this whole point about how most alien races are just ignorant because they're all basically good, and that's just, Gnosticism again. This divine gnosis will save these other races because everyone's basically good and can achieve this this utopia on Earth without a cross. But one of those supposedly good races could totally conquer the Federation and, not be socialist at the very least, maybe not be vegetarian, do some of these basic things to make the society better. But they really focus on, like, Chakotay, if you've seen Voyager, where Chakotay is the first officer to Captain Janeway, who is a woman, by the way, leading the ship. So right there, should be the number one red flag that the woman is in the lead. But her number one assistant is the man. She's like, let's go pervert this, like how marriage ought to be here in our military structure. But her first mate, who she does seem to have romantic feelings for, which is interesting. Chakotay is a American Indian. If you're woke, you'd like Native American and all that. And he's all into spiritual mumbo jumbo. And they show in a couple episodes that his spiritual mumbo jumbo is actually real. And so they're like, we're atheist materialists, but that satanic spiritualist guy who's communing with demons, that stuff's real, guys. And so I think that's extremely telling. That said, again, I very much enjoyed Star Trek. I did watch Voyager before I was saved, which helps, but I may have watched one of their animated series like a month or two ago, which was amazing, by the way.
Huge tangent about how horrible this show is. Oh, but I watched it. It was great.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't now.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
You have some teasers.
Okay. Yeah, I think we actually covered everything.
I think so.
Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
The Bible is full of many things like the Nephilim, giants, fairies, and because of even just those two things, it opens up an entire avenue for a lot of myths and mythology.
Yes.
I love believing it, even though they're all so dark.
Yes, well, and I think there's a reason. I think we are creating God's image, and we know things are not how they ought to be, and so we often suppress the truth and righteousness, but that image of God is still there, and so we do aspire towards greatness, and that can be perverted by being like every man wants to believe Atlantis is real. Like that's just so cool. Yeah. Everyone wants it to exist. And so is that a lure towards past greatness that I think we still see with like the pyramids and that sort of thing, that can be twisted and for Satan's ends. And so I don't think that desire to believe these things is wrong. Rather, we ought to, as Christians, believe those things from a Christian perspective and use that knowledge to the glory of God. Like know enough about Greek mythology that you can actually have a dialogue with these like actual Wiccan members who believe they're worshiping the same Greek pantheon. I've met people who are like, oh yeah, I worship Thor. That's the Norse version. But like I believe they are worshiping something. Maybe it's the same demonic spirit that people worshipped as Thor back then. I don't know. Or it's just another one taking up his mantle and name. I'm not sure. Either way, I think these exist, and it helps to dialogue with them because I don't want to make them atheist. It's like I don't just disbelieve that when, like, I'm thinking particularly of one witch that I kept talking to when I do evangelism outreaches every Monday at Washington State University last spring, who was like, she was fully honest that she would, like give her body parts to power her spells, like her hair and that sort of thing, and her nails and all of that. Unsurprisingly, she had physical disabilities, which I think is interesting. But I didn't want to convert her to atheism. It's not that I didn't believe her. It's not like I think you're just a crazy woman hallucinating everything. It's that you are connecting to something, but that something is evil. And eventually we got to a point where she acknowledged, okay, these spirits I'm connecting to can deceive people. So the question is, how do you know you've not been deceived? And that's where I think the apologetic is useful. So to know enough about Greek mythology, know how these work, so that you can then talk to them. I've been figuring that out with Hindus recently because I keep running into them for some reason over the last couple weeks. And I finally found out that Vishnu has a history of shapeshifting to deceive people. So it's like, okay, one of the three ultimate deities you worship is Vishnu. You acknowledge Vishnu has a history of deceiving people. How do you know you have not been deceived? And there was a Hindu last week that I was talking to, and he was so fun. He was so enthusiastic. I think he was like me if I was Hindu. He goes, oh no. Yeah, I know. He goes, oh, ooh, I love it. That's a great question. I'm going to look it up. And then he left. He was just like so happy to hear that question. It's like me when an atheist says something and I've got the answer. I'm like, let's do it. Like I've got my act, right? I'm like, I'm excited. Beautiful. Yeah, I've done that before. Beautiful. I think I did that. I probably did that at least 5 times last week. In fact, normally what I do is I get excited and it's a full body motion now for me. I go, oh, beautiful.
Yes.
And it's true. I'm so ready to like give hopefully the biblical answer to it. And so we should be ready to do that. And one of the ways to be able to do that is to know enough to recognize these patterns, such that, when I kept meeting actual Hindus, to be like, hey, I know that Wicca works this way, where spirits can deceive. I know that the Greek demons would deceive people. I know that the Norse ones would deceive people. So, and I know that, the Quran says Allah is the best of deceivers. These false religions that I believe have actual demons behind them, they always deceive people. Satan's the father of lies. Therefore, I bet their gods probably deceive people. And sure enough, when I dig further, it's like, oh, they do. And so it makes a great apologetic tool. So it's not worth less to know about these things. What is worthless is to fixate upon these more than the actual Bible.
Yes, there's a camp you can fall into of like, ooh, I can be convinced that fairies exist, giants exist, dragons. The
dragons should be the easy one.
Yeah, the actual history behind Atlantis, and there's a path you can fall down of, this is so cool, I want to fixate on it, forgetting the evil origin of it.
Yes,
it's like giants are cool, but actual giants are so evil.
Yes. Well, and the purpose of a lot of this, again, is so that we don't want to talk to Muslims, to Hindus, to people that worship these ancient gods that, produced Nephilim offspring. We don't want to talk to them as if we're trying to convince them to atheism. We want to talk to them in a way...
You meet them where they're at.
Yeah, well, and in a way that changes their viewpoint. Because I think they're much better... They're much more... They're in a worse place, in a sense, than the atheist who's a materialist, because they're like actually communicating or working with demons. So they're in a more precarious place, but they're also in a easier place to talk to, because they already reckon. You don't have to prove that God exists or that spirits exist. They already know. The problem is the one they're worshiping isn't actually God. So if you can redirect their worship to the actual God, then I think that's worthwhile. And so knowing enough to do that is good. It's why I appreciate the fact that, like, classical Christian education generally tries to teach you your heritage, where you came from, including Greek mythology and all of that. The problem is, are you focusing more on Greek mythology than you are on, say, Christendom under Europe, right? Because we had great missionaries who went to the Germanic peoples. We had great missionaries who spread the gospel, like Paul and those after him, right? The early Christians. Are you focusing on Greek mythology more than, say, the early church missionaries or the missionaries of today who are going to the Amazon jungles and Papua New Guinea? Is your focus proportionally correct? So long as it is, it's good to know. Ignorance is generally not a good thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Teasers.
Okay, yes.
The upcomings of the show.
Yes. So if that was interesting, because I think we kind of covered some of why it's worthwhile. Not only is it helpful practically in conversations, but we need some sort of systemization in our theology for things like demigods. If we have no place for them, and yet we want a consistent standard for, like, historical fact, then what do we do with them? And so it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to be aware. But as for the next time, I want to talk about how we categorize that theology. It's one thing to know they exist, but the medieval scholastic Christians understood that there were categories to this. Wicca understands those categories. Islamic jinn are a category even in Islamic theology. So these pagan cultures recognize there's different categories of these things. Christians oftentimes think that every spiritual being is an angel. Angel means messenger. And we see in Revelation, around the throne room of God, you've got the four elders, you've got these spiritual beings that are not described as angels, but yet are there. And so how do we categorize that? Wicca, Islam, ancient pagan cultures, they recognize there were categories to the fallen order. And the Bible talks about categories to the angelic order, or, the unfallen spiritual order. For a better phrase. So we as Christians ought to know something about it. But we ought not just assume, as it is above, so it is below, to quote the Gnostics, right? It's not just that because you have different categories in the unfallen spiritual, you automatically do in fallen. That's not true, but it is good to talk about. And so we ought to have some sense of that. Are there spiritual beings over nations? What are fae? Or as they're often called, fairies? How do you deal with pagan pantheons, which we delved into a bit this time? Then there's a rich church missionary history about all of this. The missionaries of old recognized these things, and they actually won people to Christ with them. And so we ought to know where we came from. We ought to know our heritage. We ought to know who we are now. And so we ought to know that. What did the church do in prior days? And then ultimately, how can we use this to witness to people? Kind of like I hinted at with Hindus. And then lastly, about ourselves, what do we do if you run into a demonic attack when you're doing missionary work or you're on the front lines of spiritual warfare? Again, I'm not actually a super Pentecostal crazy person, but I do believe that demonic attacks happen. I think it would be foolish not to. We see that in the Bible. And so what do you do? Often Protestants are just like, just pray about it. Prayer is super important, but we ought to understand what to do constructively.
We have means of attack just as they do.
Yes, and so we ought to be aware of those. And so it is good and practical. Theology always ought to come out of your fingertips. And so this theology does as well, and so it's worth talking about. But that's what I want to do in the future, so if you liked this, we'll get into more later. And so I go through the Nephilim, and he goes, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. Anyway, but I actually got him with that. And so there have been times where it's actually been useful knowing those things. Or with, Hindus adapting that to their beliefs. I vote some of that should stay in, though.
Oh, for sure.
Now that I know part of the Hail Mary, I have got...
Are you trying to memorize it?
I memorized the only part that's relevant to me is just the first line. Because it generally doesn't take more than that to make someone super uncomfortable. Because I just insert their name. It's like, hail, Fred, full of grace.
Dude, you should do an episode on, like, Vatican artifacts. Like the skull of Mary. Have you seen that?
No.
It's a black skull.
That's beautiful. And I immediately assume that it's probably whoever the female goddess they're worshipping. I'm down with it, so long as it's black.
It is black.
Not only can I...
I bet I can find you a photo.
That'd be great. Not only can I, sound racist, but I also get to be, talk about how, in the order of things, black is not generally good. Oh. I'm immediately convinced, just so that I can make fun of it. Oh my. Mary is short. Poor woman. Oh, they literally just have the head.
Yep.
Nice. And that's definitely not worship. A golden statue.
Yep.
I learned a whole lot from the Old Testament. I learned to make golden statues.
Put things in gold and you are not worshiping them.
Yep. And definitely bow down and kiss their feet and all of that and make prayers. That's just fine with God. Hence why Lutherans are saved. Catholics aren't. Well, some Lutherans. Just like I'd have to say some Baptists, some...
Yeah, some of everybody. Depends.
Yeah. But anyway. What were you saying? You were in the middle of something. I'm sorry.
I was saying it leads back to... The sons of God and the daughters of men coming together sexually, giving birth to these abominations known as the Nephilim.
Entire thing is the build up for, if no God, then nihilism.
Yeah. And then the very end is supposedly not even written by the same guy.
Seriously?
Like, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So Solomon's just like, this life sucks. The end.
And then the second author was like, I heard somebody break it down this way. The guy who finished it was like, he did still believe this. In all his torment, this is still what he believes.
If that's actually true.
I don't actually
That says so many bad things about Solomon.
I have done like no research into Ecclesiastes because I'm so caught up on Esther not being scripture.
I immediately believe you though. Immediately confirmed.
I am so quick to say that Esther is scripture, but in my personal time, I'm like, why does it have to be what it is? I wish it just had a prophet. It's
kind of like the woman caught in adultery.
It could name a prophet, and I'd be like, cool, he just affirmed it.
Yeah. So therefore, the Catholic Bible confirmed. We don't like Lutherans, but Catholics are the real deal. They're okay.
Exactly, they're clean.
Yeah, because Mordecai's a prophet.
According to Catholics?
Yeah, because they have a few extra chapters to the Book of Esther. And then their extra chapters...
Oh, in their extra chapters it mentions God.
Yeah, it also uses his name.
Does it... Wait, do the extra chapters say anything about... Oh, does Mordecai prophesy?
So it says Mordecai the prophet in the next chapter for the Catholics.
What? Okay, now I gotta look into why we took out those chapters. Oh, were they added later?
I actually have no idea. I just assume so.
I need to look into
It's kind of like their Book of Daniel.
That would fix the whole problem.
Yeah. Yes, that's how I found out.
Give me one more chapter and it's scripture.
Well, their Book of Daniel actually has a dragon fight. They have an extra...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Bell and Dragon.
Bell and the Dragon.
Yep, so I don't know why those aren't in there. I assume what happened is some scribe somewhere through in the Catholic Church, he's like, this is a problem for Esther. Let me fix this real quick. Let me just put
I
in
actually
a
did hear
prophet.
that was the problem. I heard that the Jews realized that it didn't mention God, and they're like, so they like fixed it.
Way to go. This is why they're so reliable.
Hey, why trust the Old Testament? Because the Jews did. That's it.
Just an unsatisfying answer. The more I learn about the Talmud and like how bad rabbis are, it's like, why should we trust you? Because those weird occultists who commune with demons do,
like,
obviously.
I need to trust the people who constantly were just like, no, we would rather worship a golden cow.
Yep.
Moses is taking a little too long on that hill. You know what? Let's just build something and worship it.
and then while Moses is up there, we're gonna conclude retroactively that he was actually getting an oral law because he had to be getting something up there.
Yeah, he didn't just get those things he broke. Like,
no,
it took you that long to write that?
Nope.
Nope. Clearly the Talmud.
Yeah, the entire thing, which we have no evidence of until miraculously after 70 AD. Shockingly, when the temple falls.
I'm sure the Jews and the Mormons would find a lot in common with each other about we have golden tablets that don't exist. We have an oral law that doesn't exist.
Yeah. I feel like actually the Mormons, Talmudic Judaism, and ironically Muslims, if they would just sit down and talk, would be like, we're basically the same. One is, we just got the black violent sheep of the party. And so, like, you have to kill enough of those guys.
The youngest sibling who's just, like, wild and crazy.
Yeah.
I want to blow everything up. No, it's okay. But my revelation was awesome.
And it said to do it. Like, the kid that's like, God told me I can have dessert.
the oldest sibling, the Jew's like, oh, God said we can have dessert. And I think I'm more responsible than my parents. And then the middle sibling's like, I just kind of want to chill. And have everybody be happy.
And be American.
And the younger sibling's like, bombs!
Which is ironic because the real youngest sibling is Mormonism. So, like, are they just a reaction to their middle sibling?
Okay, the middle sibling's the one that's always ignored. And so he's like, I gotta make a name for myself. Boom! And the youngest sibling is like, I get to be God. Oh, cults. So silly.
And basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing the Bible has nothing weird in it.
Exactly. We're not talking about giants right now or anything.
Or demon spawn.
Soon talking about fairies.
Fairies are real, I'll have you know. Absolutely.
What's the episode called? I want to watch it. Is it the one with like the garden gnomes?
Oh, it's called The Fair Folk.
The Fair Folk. Oh! Okay.
It's okay.
I need to... Is it convincing? Earl, what actually convinced you?
It's all their other stuff continually being like, these are fairies. And then and then looking into what the medievals actually thought fairies were. And it was like, oh, so I already agreed with, like, I already believed that there was a military hierarchy. I just didn't have a name for it.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like, okay, if they just called this, like the ones lower down on the totem pole fairies, I don't have a problem with calling it. And it's way more entertaining because it freaks people out. But it's not actually weird. Yeah. It's just like, instead of ruling over a nation, like Daniel mentions, it's like you get the state of Washington, or like a part of a nation, and those are just what they called fairies. And I believe that the spiritual military structure does work that way. And so it's like, oh, okay, they just gave me a name for what I already agreed with. Although I need to research evidence for a breakdown of structure like that. Mm-hmm. I think the structure for nations is pretty simple, because it's just the Book of Daniel.
It's straightforward.
Yeah. And Paul mentions the principalities and governing bodies, but I need to figure out what those are. And what in the world are elemental spirits? I love how on Cosmos is like, and these are elemental spirits. And they go on and on about how it's not like some natural thing, it's definitely elemental spirits. And then they're like, and what are elemental spirits? No idea. Moving on.
It's not clarified, so we're going to just create a whole theology off of it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. That's one way to do it.
Is regulatory worship practices versus the other. So like if the Bible only mentions using these instruments, you only use these. Versus the philosophy of if the Bible doesn't say not to use this instrument, we will use it.
And all the others like it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, it's so funny. Okay, Gilgamesh.
Yes. I vote some of that should stay in though.
Oh, for sure.
Keep
whatever
fun.
you want. It was all fun.
Mm-hmm. I came back in halfway through our conversation about Esther, I think.
Oh, man.